talk about the border protection issues and the legal path to citizenship. We all recognize that there's a crisis at the border. Yesterday, Jen Psaki, the press secretary of President Biden, actually said that this entire crisis is the fault of President Trump and the previous administration. Now, since you were an assistant undersecretary of defense for Western Hemisphere, you know a bit about this. And I know for a fact, based on our meetings in the past and discussions on this, you all had established an effective counter to illegal immigration and were strengthening the path to legal immigration, which is the right thing to do. Can you talk a little bit about what you all did as the Trump administration to prevent the current crisis from happening as we now see at the border?
Absolutely. So one of the key things that you do in the Pentagon is you have different mission sets depending on what your responsibilities are. Mine were to ensure that we had good relationships with anything outside the United States. So leading up to the south border, what I did is make sure that all of our partners understood exactly where we stood on immigration rules and policies. And we wanted to make sure that we crafted something that involved our partners. So I was dealing with the international piece. There's another Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Pentagon that looks at internal homeland defense. And they and I had a very good relationship in making sure that everybody kept each other informed on things relating to what the flows were going up to the border. Once they were at the border and working and assisting with the construction of the border fence was their responsibility. Now, how does that impact Virginia and why is that so important? What's happened in the world because of communications and what we now have through technology is that we're more interconnected. So what becomes a global issue becomes a local issue. And the local issues are how many people are coming to Virginia and what are we doing about making sure that whoever is here, be they legal or illegal, has some type of protections. There's obviously rule of law issues involved here that, first of all, they shouldn't be here illegally in the first place, but they're here. So you have to make sure that you put in place the appropriate mechanisms to make sure that you comply not just with Commonwealth law, but also the federal law. And that's where we end up with a conflict because the federal law is being usurped because we have no rule of law because you're allowing an illegal action to take place. And in fact, you're encouraging it. So what that does is it puts us in a conflict with the federal government. So what we have to do is figure out a way to come up with a viable solution given the current administration's position on not abiding by federal law.
So that brings me to my second part of the question on this topic is how will you then as governor work with other states to ensure that those interests, the interest, as you mentioned, the idea that we must examine that path regarding no matter how people get here. And one of the things, Sergio, I'm not sure if the audience understands, and I think you and I both knew, I talked to Tom Homan, former director of the border security effort in DHS, and he's talked about the fact that the people who are most abused in this process are illegal aliens. If during the process of coming across the border, it's inhumane. Once they get here, they get into these communities, and they are abused by criminal elements. So, how will you work with other governors then? You talked about the communications piece that's so important. How will you work with governors like Abbott and DeSantis to just fix what you can for the people of Virginia?
No, that's absolutely true. So I go back to the interconnected nature of who we are as states. So you would talk to states that are directly involved, especially states, the four border states. So you've got to be able to have communications with those governors to ensure that you understand exactly what the flows are, you understand where people are going, because there is some understanding of what's going on because they're on the ground. So you want to make sure that you understand where the people are coming from, where they're going to be directed to, and then make sure that you track them once they arrive. And then you need to put accountability measures for the federal government when they show up and you end up picking up the tab for all of these people that are coming in that you don't even know about. They end up in our communities. Many of them are here in Northern Virginia. This is one of the favorite places because we have a high level of Central Americans in this area. Once the family links are established, there's more that come in. The problem is that they do become the object of abuse because the human traffickers are going to constantly be taking advantage of them. So we need to make sure that we put in place the mechanisms to go after those people that are involved in human trafficking and hold them accountable to the law.
Yeah. So, yeah, and everything you've talked about is so important to actually helping to restore economic security, because one of the things that happens, Sergio, economically is when you have unlimited cheap labor, you actually harm the blue collar community. And the left used to understand this. Bernie Sanders used to support the idea of limited and controlled immigration, but somehow that's not an issue now, because the more you feed in this pool of labor, you harm your own economy. So that's something clearly it's on your mind. And I appreciate your time and answering my questions this morning, Sergio. Look forward to being with you for the rest of the week.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just close on this. You've got to put in place the legal mechanisms where you can provide legal laborers to do work that must be done. Farm labor is one of those that's very important. That's the way that my father came to this country, through a legal contracting process that the U.S. government had. We need to look at how many of those visas you really need, and you need to make sure that you have a legal mechanism to bring people in. People want to come and go, and we're not doing that. And that can also be a way to have the US government come up with better ways of legal immigration. But I would suggest that all of us write to our congressmen and women and make sure that they understand the importance of having a viable immigration program that allows for workers to come in legally. If we can put a fix on that, then we can reduce a lot of these other activities. The bringing up of children is a horrible thing that's been created by our own government. And it's basically being a sponsor to child abuse, because anyone that can send the children on a trek across Mexico on top of a boxcar, you have to wonder if they were in the United States, how they would be treated by the authorities that take care of children. So it's a very complex problem, and it's one that's going to continue because it's part of a bigger scheme to create a bigger voting base, because ultimately some of those in government do not care about what happens to those people that are involved in this process.